Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Herminia Ibarra. I will tell you all about Herminia in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show which deals with what's often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we exert toward others. And when you do it from a leadership proposition, you do it with a reason of common cause to bring people together and achieve great things. Herminia Ibarra, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. And now I want to tell everybody about you. You are the Charles Handy Professor of Organizational Behaviour at the London Business School, and you've served on INSEAD and Harvard Business School faculties for more than 25 years. I don't believe the 25 years. I think it's only 10. And you teach executives and MBAs on human resource strategy that transform organizations. In 2019, you were awarded the LBS Excellence in Teaching Prize, and Thinkers 50 ranks you among the top management thinkers. You're also, and we're going to talk about that today, a brand new book called Working Identity. And your work has been featured around the world. And it is a pleasure to have you on the show, Herminia Ibarra. So, welcome.
Thank you, John. I have to correct one thing, John. My new book, Working Identity, is not really a new book. It's the second edition of a book that came out 20 years ago. So in it, we're kind of playing it like it's a new book, but it's actually not a new book.
Well, great. It's new to me. I'll say that anyway.
Good.
So, what I like about your work, and I have followed you, is you take a contrarian view toward our leadership selves. So, what does it mean to have a working identity?
So working identity was meant to be a play on words. It is our identity as it is formed by the work that we do, but it's also the verb form, working your identity, meaning working it like you would work a draft. So it's meant to convey both of those things.
Very clever. I like that. So now I have to ask you, because as an author-to-author question, and I think you have infinitely more patience than I do. And it's how did you muster the energy to go back and revise a whole new book? Where did that come from and why? So,
well, the idea was my editor's, and she felt that time was ripe to put out a new edition because while the topic was timeless, there had been so much in the air, the pandemic, the great resignation, the threat of AI, all of those things that were really causing people to rethink what they wanted to do with their work and careers. But at the same time, I remember when the conversation started, the idea just seemed exhausting. She felt, okay, but we'll keep the book, but we'll have all new stories in it and this and that. And I said, no, that's a whole new book. We can revise this one. So it's still the old book. It has a new preface. It has, I've sort of tidied it up a bit. It was my first general audience book. And so there were parts of that book that were a bit dense and academic-y, and people had pointed it out very clearly. So I simplified some of that. I added chapter summaries, some small exercises. I added some new examples, but it's basically the same book. And I have to say, I enjoyed doing it. I dreaded doing it, but I actually enjoyed doing it.
Well, that's wonderful because again, I wouldn't have the patience to do a major revision like that. So I salute you. So anyway, you have a concept called possible selves, and I'd like your take on this because it's sort of, you say you don't need to know the end before you begin, and that might be an intimidating thought for some of us. So how do you deal with that? Explain that, Herminia.
Okay, so two things in there. I've been studying people making career change for now more than 20 years. And, it's funny because we just did a couple of big surveys based on kind of online seminars. And the thing that comes up over and over again as the number one obstacle to making a career change is people knowing what they don't want anymore, but not knowing what they want to do instead. So this kind of sense of, I want to change, And I can give you broad characteristics, but I don't really know exactly what is the thing I want to do instead. And so the only way you solve that, that's a problem. That's a problem of discovery. That's a problem in which you have to do and try in order to figure out what you want. And so that's one about, because you don't have the answer what you're looking for. You look for a range of possibilities, possible selves, possible future selves. It's actually a concept that comes from a psychologist named Hazel Marcus, who through her entire career and study after study really was able to show that our sense of identity is not just retrospective and not just in the present, but also our kind of our images of who we might become in the future, positive and negative, by the way. Some of them scare us, and how much those possible selves really motivate us in this kind of fuzzy search for something that we only know when we approach it.
Well, I think, and inherent in that digging down is you talk about widening the lens. So maybe we don't know what we're clear about what we don't want to do. I don't want to be a contractor. I don't want to be a mountain climber or something like that. But if I'm a teacher, how can I widen my lens or whatever profession? What do you mean by that, Armenia? So.
Possible selves is really thinking about what are things that appeal to me, what are things I might explore, what are things that might become future careers, what are things that I might try out on a small scale. But they really are it's a brainstorming with yourself about what you might do next. And whether you're a teacher or anything else, there's lots of possibilities. Some are more radical reinventions. Some you might have to go back to school for. Others might be easier to make a shift into. But it is what I have found, again, once people start thinking about changing away from something they've done for a while, they generally tend to consider a portfolio of possibilities. They often, unless they really know, they tend to consider a range of different things. Some might take more effort. Some might be easier to move into. Some might be more lucrative. The others may be more meaningful. And so it's often in exploring those different things that you say, okay, I'm willing to trade off that amount of money for something that is more meaningful, or I'm not willing to do that at this point in my life. In checking them out, you get clearer on what specifically are the things that you're looking for.
Well, you mentioned that operative word, and that is change. And I'm certain you know the work of Rosabeth Moss Cantor, and she talked about organizational change. And I'm sure you have explored that too. But when we get into personal change, what's holding us back? Is it fear or something else? So.
Yeah, I was Rosabeth's teaching assistant in the 1980s at Yale School of Management. So we go back a very long ways. Change is uncertainty. Change is uncertainty. We know we know what life looks like today. Might be good, bad, or indifferent, but it. Change is uncertain, and we don't like uncertainty.
Great. Well, that's straightforward. Now, you use some clever terms. I love this thing. You talk about the word committed flirtation as well as disappearing doors. How does that play into the concept of possible selves?
So committed flirtation is the idea that you are going to flirt with these possible selves. That is, explore them, date them, get to know them, ideally without making a commitment. One of the things that I found is that people often have fantasies of what they would like to do next, but they've never tried them out. And in fact, when they try them, often they don't like it as much as they thought they would. For example, I was just recently chatting with a Wall Street Journal journalist who said, I spent X years of my career dreaming of being a full-time writer and thinking I couldn't do it. I couldn't make that work financially until I finally gave it a try and wrote a book. And I'd rather die than work full-time as a writer. I went right back to journalism. It was not the thing for me. And so what I mean by committed flirtation is, rather than take a leap and say, okay, I'm going to quit my job and jump into this, why don't I do that? Why don't I set aside a few hours a week and approach it seriously? Committed flirtation means you don't dabble once a year, but you set up a structure, you approach it seriously, you test it, you reach out, you connect to people, but without committing to it until you have built up enough experience to know whether it is worth whatever trade-off is involved.
That's great. But I love the term committed flirtation. So it's an experimentation. That's great.
Yeah,
So, and then
Disappearing Doors comes from Dan Ariely, and it's how much we as humans are averse to loss. We'll do anything to avoid a loss, which is one of the reasons why career change is so hard until you have something else that's a bit of a beacon to pull you. Otherwise, it's all loss.
great. Good. Now, you explore the concept of storytelling, and virtually everyone who writes in the leadership sector talks about storytelling, sharing with the organization. How does storytelling, how can it play a role in self-transformation? So,
It plays a huge role for two different reasons. So when you go through the process of making a career change, there's a lot at first that doesn't make sense either to you or the people around you. Think of, I think back, one of my favorite stories in my book was someone who was a brain surgeon. And at one point, he couldn't stand it anymore. He really didn't want to be a brain surgeon, but he had invested so many years of his life in this. It made no sense to change. And so storytelling is really an act of making sense. First, for yourself. How do you explain to yourself that what you're doing isn't ridiculous? You're not going to regret it. But also, how do you explain it to other people who have to hire you or finance you or support you? How do you explain it to your family who's afraid that you're going to do something stupid and hurt their livelihood? All of these things are acts of making sense. And the only thing that does that is a story that says, here's how I came to this and why.
great. I like that concept because it's a use of imagination. Imagine yourself doing X. Is that really what you're talking about? So, now, there's something else you call, we're in this process. We're exploring our possible selves, and then we get to, we're in the period, and you call it messy middle. And it reminded me of the work of Peter Block, which he was talking about change. When we're kind of in the middle, we too far from the shore, and we don't see the new shore. So we're in that middle. Is that what you refer to in a personal transformation?
Yeah, everybody who has ever studied change knows that there's endings, there's beginnings, but in between there's this stuff, when you're neither here nor there. Being in transition means you're moving away from something that you haven't fully left yet, and you're moving towards something that isn't yet clear, isn't yet defined. And so it means you're between and betwixt, or betwixt and between. You're in the middle. And that's hard because for most people, that means they don't have a clear sense of identity. That's part of what's difficult for them. They don't have a story. They've lost the plot. And it's a phase that's inevitable. In every change process, you do go through it. And the important thing is to learn from it, because when you are grappling with all of the different things that you have to figure out, that means that you need the time to figure them out.
Okay. Do you have, and I think we're getting into this as we move forward from the messy middle, we get into this deep change. And you have some experiments, I will call them. What does it mean to, you call crafting experiments, testing the future? How would one do that if I'm in the messy middle? How would I test my future? So,
well, it turns out people do that in all kinds of different ways. They will work on some kind of side project. They will work with friends on a startup. They will take a course to become a coach and do some of it on the side. They will sit on a board. They will volunteer for an industry association for a role. And there are different ways of getting experience and making connections and really testing in a very physical and real way. What would it be like to be in that world?
so and then And I guess going back to the reporter you were talking to, he made that conscious shift and became a full-time writer and said, "Hey, it's not for me." So that was his experiment. Am I on the right track there? So
Yeah, it was a she. It was a she. But the
she.
experiment was to take a short sabbatical, try it out without burning bridges. And that's another way of doing committed flirtation. Is you take a leave, you take a sabbatical, you don't burn your bridges, you can go back to your job ideally, and you try something out, or you negotiate a sabbatical. You don't like it, you go back. You like it, maybe you go back and start doing it more so on the side, because oftentimes a short amount of time isn't enough to clinch it. But that's what you get out of those experiments.
Okay, and as you were talking about, experimenting, then going back to the career and back and forth, is there? And it thought to me, is there anything wrong with doing that? Could that not be your new identity, where you sort of have two identities? I'm not talking schizophrenia, but I'm talking about I have my full-time job, but I have my avocation or my passion. Does that make sense?
People do
So.
that. People do that all the time. Excuse me. People do that all the time. There is absolutely no reason why work should have to take the whole of our identity. But what often happens is people start a project on the side. Sometimes it's not meant to be a new career. I saw this happen a lot with people shifting into the nonprofit world, for example, or shifting into a more creative domain. It is a way they fulfill another part of themselves, but then it becomes a possible new career. And then that starts to pull them. It's a process in which here's this thing that starts to get more of your time and energy and attention, and attracts you more, and your networks are all in that area now. And then you start to resent the time that you can't give it because of your day job. And that's when people start to shift.
That's good. I couldn't help but think of Groucho Marx, is a comedian and I've long admired, and he was doing a roast of the longtime television host Johnny Carson, and he was doing this shtick about being on. I've been on the show 3 times, and Johnny was not there any of those 3 times. He had a guest host. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're honoring a person who never shows up for work." So it kind of reminds you of changing what you're doing. So anyway, now we come to something that you and I share. We are both members of 100 Coaches, founded by Marshall Goldsmith. And you have a lovely thought about kindred spirits. And one of the joys of that you and I share is we can share our stories and learn from our colleagues. So how do we connect with our kindred spirits? What should we look for, Herminia? So.
Yeah. No, that's a great example. In fact, I wrote a little bit about 100 Coaches in the new edition of Working Identity under the section about communities of practice, which is one of the places where we get kindred spirits. And that is, where are other people who are interested in the same things that I'm interested in? Where are other people who are practicing some of the things that I'm practicing, and how can I connect? Sometimes we get lucky and somebody like Marshall organizes that. Other times I've seen people, simply do it on their own, kind of pull together, 3-4 people who share an interest. Let's have a monthly Zoom. Eventually other people kind of join, the community grows. There's lots of ways of doing it. Taking a course will usually do it. You will find other people who share interests. All kinds of ways. But the idea is, these are journeys that are best not taken alone. You need a lot of support through it. And the people around you are a mirror to you about what's possible and what's not possible. It's very powerful. And so it's very important not just to think about your network in terms of leads for roles, but also around support and what community do I want to be a part of.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that the sense of, you just used the word community, and I think that's so essential because change is intimidating, and if we're surrounded by colleagues, kindred spirits, that's more of a, hey, I've been through this, or I'll listen to you, so we're not alone. So.
Absolutely.
Great. Now you have this, okay, we've been through crafting experiments and shifting connections, and you tie it all together with making sense. So we always say that. I can hear my mother now, make sense of this. So the experiment. So, and you use a term about clarity. In this transformation, what does clarity look and feel like? So,
Yeah. So this ties back a little bit to the storytelling conversation we were having. As you are trying, as you're experimenting with different kinds of things and meeting new people and connecting in different networks, you're having a lot of new experiences. And so you've got to process that somehow. You've got to make sense of it. People talk all the time about catalysts that sparked change. They also often talk about moments of crystallization. That is, you know, haven't quite put all the dots together, but all of a sudden you have a moment of clarity where you understand something you didn't understand before. I'll give you an example. It also comes from somebody in the book who was an academic and was quite unhappy being an academic, as he did not especially love research and writing, and he was really gearing for a role in a business company, as you know, and he had already been advisor to a number, and there was one organization that really wanted him to come and be their COO, and it seemed to make a lot of sense given his expertise. And in the course of a volunteer project with an old mentor of his, he just got the light bulb about what it was that was making him hesitate about making that leap to the company he'd been working with. And it was that he understood that he was at a stage in his career where the relationships matter a lot. He wanted some mentoring to kind of help him get to the next place. And in the other place, he was the expert. He was not going to have that. And when it crystallized for him as a result of working on this other project, it's moments of clarity where you're able to say, not that you've come to the end of the road, but you're able to say, oh, now I understand this is something that's really important for me, or now I understand this thing's been holding me back. That's what I mean by it.
okay. Oh, and it's that epiphany, that moment of awareness. I'm glad that you do that, and it's just so important when we do this. Now, part of your book and the first version and now the new one, Working Identity, you have assessments and exercises. Is there an exercise or two that you want to share with us that what might help people in their transformative process? So.
Sure. I mean, there's lots of them. I have to say my very favorite, although it really helps to do it in a small group, my very favorite is brainstorming the list of possible selves. And the assignment really is to make the list as long and as divergent as possible. Because, you always get asked, who do you want to be, when you grow up? What do you want to do 5 years from now? There's one answer. And here you get to put 15 and they don't have to be coherent, and they can be divergent, and they don't have to be realistic. And it's really very, very freeing for people because it helps them understand how many different facets there are to them, how many different attractive possibilities there may be there, and how many paths could be actually open to them, even at mid and later career.
I like that. I was just, for some reason, I was thinking of an astronaut, and I go, well, that's the last thing I could see myself going to, not only because of the age I'm at now, but there's something about it. We all like to explore, and that's something that would have be of value. So.
Yeah, I mean, somebody just told me recently an astronaut story. It was similar, somebody who always had that fantasy, and of course wasn't actually going to be an astronaut, but in the course of having conversations about possible selves and kind of the wacky, unrealistic ones, it actually led him to a role in an aeronautical company that he loved. And so, there's twists and turns in all of these stories.
As we were talking, I was wondering we're thinking about self and different possibilities and forming a storytelling and seeking clarity. Does the imposter syndrome enter the picture at all, Herminia? So.
I don't know. It's, I have a thing about imposter syndrome. I think all of us have it to some degree, unless we're a little bit
I
crazy.
agree.
Just, it's who can be conscientious and not have imposter syndrome at some point in time. Everybody I know who's really good has imposter syndrome, right? The question is whether it gets
Absolutely.
to be debilitating. So I don't know about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome, you you're not going to have it until you're actually in a role where you feel like maybe you're not quite equipped for. There's quite a journey from I'm stuck in this career I don't want, to actually being in a role where you could possibly have imposter syndrome. By the time you get there, you will have gone through so many hurdles that you might have some, but that's not what I worry about. What I worry most about is people who don't do anything because they think, where do I start? I don't know what to do. And so they just sit there, and that creates a cycle of inaction that's actually quite debilitating, because you start blaming yourself and say, oh, I have self-doubt, I have imposter syndrome, I have this, I have that. It reduces confidence and makes it less likely for you to act. And my whole thing is about, what are easy ways to get started, doing things actively, connecting to new people, trying new and different things, and letting that create some steps out towards something else.
Well, you are certainly providing a path. And what I think one of the operative principles of your book is that it is focused on self, but as you talked about, as we seek clarity, the kindred spirit. You're not in this alone, and feel free to connect with others to help you, as they should. And I think that's a powerful thought, Herminia. So great. So we're coming to the end of our show, and is there something else you wish to add about the concept, or if not, tell us how we can find you. So
I think we've covered it. You can find me at herminiaibarra.com, and under my name in LinkedIn and at X.
great. Herminia Ibarra, it is such a pleasure to speak to you today. Good luck with the brand new book, Working Identities, and catch you the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.